YKK. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this UEF Café Smart. It's one of the science cafes organized by the University of Eastern Finland to celebrate Finland's 100th anniversary, 100 years of independence. I'm Jopi Newman, I'm professor of English at the University of Eastern Finland, and I'm chairing this or hosting this event this afternoon. This science cafe focuses very much on research which has been conducted under one of the university's most significant research areas, BOMO-CULT, which is short for Borders, Mobilities and Cultural Encounters. And I'm also one of the co-directors of the research area. Today's theme is quite interesting, and it might appear quite abstract, but we hope through two talks to make it very concrete to you, all of you here. The title is Consequences of Globalization Phenomena at the Local Level. In a few minutes' time, we'll see how important it is for everybody, because globalization, of course, affects everybody, also everybody in Finland, and in very interesting and diverse ways. So we will have two talks today. One will concentrate on borders. One is looking at linguistic encounters in the era of increased language contacts. And I now have the great pleasure to briefly introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Anna Casaglia from the Karelian Institute at the University of Eastern Finland. And our second speaker is Dr. Esa Penttilä, who is a senior lecturer in English at the School of Humanities. So both talks approach the topic from the perspective of the humanities and social sciences, which are the strengths, particular strengths on this university campus. And I think I'll next give the floor to Anna, whose talk, just a second for the title. The title of her talk is Borders in Everyday Life. And please feel free to ask questions during the talk. Just raise your hand. I will bring the microphone to you. If you can't see the screen, you're most welcome to move your chairs towards the screen. And that's the instructions. I think the talks will be around 20 minutes or so, and we will have plenty of time for discussion. And please, if you haven't already got your cup of coffee, please go to the desk and you will get coffee and a joulutorttu as well. So, Anna, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jopi, and good afternoon, everyone. Actually, I don't have slides to show you during my talk, so you won't need to move closer for the moment. I'm really happy to be here and get the occasion to talk to the public about the research that we conduct in the BOMO-CULT research area, and I in particular work, as Joni already said, on borders, and especially in the context of the European Union. And this talk today will explore the changing nature of borders and their significance, especially referring, as I said, to the European Union and the European context. Borders as we know them can be considered a modern invention, and although this statement can sound peculiar and strange, because we are used to take for granted the present division of the world territories into nation states, if you think about the world, immediately you think about a map where different states are drawn in different colors, and they are divided by clear lines that we call borders or boundaries. And the fact that this map has changed frequently throughout times is already an indication of the non-fixity of borders, which historically have changed many times, and they also have assumed different connotations according to different historical period and also geographical contexts, of course. So borders, in fact, are political and social constructions. Just think about what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall, for example, and the end of the Cold War, and how many new borders appeared in the political map of the world, showing how the lines dividing nation states are neither natural nor immutable, if you think about it. So nation states were drawn on the political map of the world in such a permanent way that they are almost considered to be natural formations, best form of social organization, and the principal source of social, cultural, and political identity for citizens. The nation state, as we know it, is a sovereign entity delimited by boundaries, and it is the result of the Westphalian treaties in the mid-1600s, whereas the present configuration of the European political map is more or less the result of the Second World War and the subsequent division of territories. Most recent events that have changed the configuration of Europe and of its political map are indeed the end of the Cold War and also the Yugoslavian War, which implied the emergence of new political entities. The end of the Cold War, together with the constitution of the European Union in the 90s, were initially interpreted as a historical moment when humanity would have finally lived in a globalized world without borders. The European Union was making internal borders easy to cross. The Iron Curtain had fallen, the Berlin Wall was torn apart, and some believed that this was the end of the era of the nation states as we knew them, and therefore the end of borders. For better or for good, though, the history went in another direction, and the present situation is one where borders not only still exist, but they are becoming more and more securitized. Even the opening of the internal borders of the European Union meant the securitization of its external boundaries. And there are different factors that have to be taken into consideration when we think about the present situation. From one side, there has been the attempt with the Constitution of the European Union to put an end to the war for supremacy among nation states and to guarantee peace to Europe after the two world wars and the Holocaust experience. At the same time, the globalization of capital has involved a process of denationalization and the rescaling of governance and economic power that has put into discussion the importance of nation states, especially in relation to the new features of global financial capital, which is related to multinational entities and moves along transnational fluxes. Globalization, however, has also made much clearer how Western healthy countries rely on the exploitation of resources from the southern and poorer parts of the world, creating a situation of structural inequalities that has been interpreted as a form of neocolonialism. The formation of the European Union and the new geopolitical balance among Western countries has guaranteed peace, more or less, in the European context and in other healthy countries. But war has not disappeared. Rather, it just became less visible to us. It moved somewhere else. Besides conflict related to territorial or sovereignty disputes, such as those connected with secessionist movements, for example, in the last decades, wars have interested large parts of African, Middle Eastern, and Asian countries. The sophistication, these conflicts have serious consequences in the life of civilians, either for their long duration or for their intensity, and some other times because they trigger interethnic or religious confrontations, and therefore they involve persecution and the limitation of personal freedom. And during situation of war, poverty, political instability, authoritarian government, to tell just some of the possible factors, have been forcing people to move and to leave their home countries in search for a better life, or sometimes just to survive. Recent major conflicts in Syria and other Middle Eastern and African countries have been the root cause of what has been defined the refugee crisis. 100,000 people are fleeing from places where it is not possible to live a normal life, a secure life, and they search for asylum in safer countries of the world. Migration is not a new phenomenon, since humans have always been moving to discover new lands, to search for better resources, or to improve their life condition. However, the meaning that we give to migration has changed throughout time, as well as the management of people's mobility, and nowadays there are very different categories of people on the move. The contemporary evolution of globalization has made connections easier, both online and offline, as you well know, which means that for a lot of people today, it is incredibly easy to travel and to move from one place to another. The easiness of movement that we experience as European citizens is nowadays really incredible. European passports, with some differences among them, provide the possibility to move with little or no restrictions, especially within the EU, but also outside. Different passports indeed mean different access. And this is the most evident inequality related to the connection between borders and mobility. Crossing a border can be a very different experience according to where you come from, but not only that. Borders, in fact, are designed and managed in order to allow some fluxes and restrict some others. And they have to do this at the same time. They need to be open and closed, friendly and hostile, secure and permeable, according to the characteristics of what or who is crossing them. The sophistication of this bordering mechanism is continuously growing, together with the development of new technologies and new ways to filter the unwanted. From a technological point of view, if you think about it now, electronic passports, face and fingerprints recognitions, body scans, or other technologies of recognition that we can experience ourselves when we travel through airports, they are all evidences of this incredible development. On the other side, what scholars and researchers have been showing in the last decade or so is that borders are more and more diffused, they're more and more pervasive, and they affect people's life in an unprecedented way. This means that the border work, which involves all the mechanisms of control and selectivity operated by the border, does not happen only at the border itself, on the line, but rather it is diffused in various moments and places of everyday activities. The visa system, just to make you an easy example, but likewise passport regulation, require people to go to an office well in advance, provide documents, apply, and hopefully be granted what they want. And there are other mechanisms of control and surveillance that act far from the border itself, as well as processes that privilege certain people and exclude some others. Think about the so-called global nomads, and now I'm quoting a book that's called Borderities. These global nomads who are always on the move, and they continuously cross border. They move between standardized spaces along circuits that are dedicated to them. They have easy access to facilities, such as air conditioning or Wi-Fi connections, as well as access to rights and privileges, including entry to business class transportation, VIP lounges, fast security checks with no queuing, visa exceptions, easy access to citizenship even in numerous countries. The issue of access and boundary crossing do not exist for them at the cost of their privacy, since their actions are fully traceable. On the other side, refugees and economic migrants from poorer war-torn countries in the southern part of the world face prohibitions of movement and crossing. They take the border with them wherever they travel, since they are always subject to the risk of interception, detention, and expulsion. And they are often dependent on smugglers or illegal crossing. As white Western citizens, we tend not to realize how privileged we are in the way we we access travel and mobility services, and we give for granted the possibility to ask for a visa and getting it easily. The procedures required for crossing a border have become something that we do without even thinking about it. And they have become even a routine for someone. Just if I think about myself, I am an Italian citizen, but I work and live in Finland. I travel a lot for work, and I have no problems in getting a visa or move around. But of course, like any other privilege, this is not for all. And someone's privilege means someone else's deprivation and limitation of mobility. The double function of border that I was talking about before, which have to be at the same time permeable and secure, open and closed, friendly and hostile, is clearly reflected in this differential inclusion. Borders have to be selective, and this selectivity operates in a way that makes it very easy for certain people and very hard or impossible for others to cross them. Clearly, the experience of mobility varies a lot depending on who you are, your nationality, your ethnicity, your bank account, your religious belief, your gender, and so on and so forth. The criteria of this selectivity, though, are not fixed. Rather, they can change and modify according to new needs, new geopolitical configurations, new fears. Policies related to border management are continuously discussed and revised, as well as policies regarding asylum and migrants' integrations. This became evident in recent times, when the topic of migration and refugee welcoming has become central in the political and public discourse, especially in Europe, but not only. Different countries have experienced the emergence of populistic parties and radical movements against migrants and aiming at the closure and the securitization of borders. And this has indeed affected the political choices as well. Just to make you an example, Sweden, which has always been considered a welcoming country with a sophisticated set of asylum policies, has restricted access to refugees and migrants, and has even reintroduced controls on its border with Denmark, which is a Schengen border. Sweden is just an example, since controls have been reintroduced at other Schengen borders that are the borders within the European Union that are supposed to be open to guarantee free circulation of European citizens. And this is another evidence of the fact that borders are artificial and that their use, management and meaning can change according to different situations and needs. To make an even closer example, the border between Finland and Russia, that was a highly securitized one during the Cold War, given it was the longest section of the Iron Curtain, in the 90s became an open border with projects of cross-border cooperation and economic exchange and with visa facilitations. Its meaning changed completely, and from being a barrier, it became a resource, not just an economic one. It gave impulse to cross-border travels, encounters, and reciprocal knowledge. Then the Ukraine crisis has transformed the situation again, since, for example, the sanctions towards Russia by the European Union have limited the potential of cross-border cooperation programs. And even more importantly, a renovated discourse about the return of the Cold War and the return of geopolitics and the danger of Russian politics have recreated a dangerous idea of what stays on the other side of the border and the need to control it. Another factor that influenced this shift has been the illegal entry of undocumented migrants from that border, the so-called northern route, during the winter of 2015, which resulted in its securitization, aimed at preventing more people to enter both Finland and Norway from Russia with the help of smugglers. These considerations about the idea and perceptions that we have about borders and migration have to do with the fact that the everyday bordering process also regards the way in which borders and border crossings are represented and narrated. Newspapers and television programs in Finland and elsewhere in Europe are daily concerned about issues related to securitization, migration, the death of migrants, asylum policies, etc. Also, an increasing amount of literature, movies, graphic novels, and other popular products talk about migration and the refugee crisis. And all these representations constitutes and contributes in the construction of our own perception and imaginary of the phenomenon. Different forms of media clearly influence our conception of the world, as they are crucial sources of how we make sense of what is happening in the world around us. So this expression of the border work becomes a pervasive daily experience for all of us, affecting our sense of security, our image of the border, and our relation with the others. In recent times, the increase of fear towards diversity and the attachment to identity features related to the nation state and to ethnicity have become a serious issue within the EU. Populistic parties, as I already mentioned, are growing and they are having success in different countries. And border control has been re-established along the inner boundaries of some European countries, and even walls and fences have been erected in some cases, like on the border between Hungary and Serbia. At the same time, wars, starvation, political persecution, and other factors related to geopolitical conflict or to the devastating effect of climate change push people to move, and this is not going to end. Migrating is becoming increasingly dangerous, since more control at borders means more illegality to cross them. Smugglers are making a lot of money out of securitization and out of the life of migrants, who continue to move and continue to die along the different routes that open and close depending on border control. At the beginning of this intervention, I said that the borders are social and political constructions, and we saw how this is relevant, especially in the contemporary globalized world. It is important to reflect on what we take for granted and understand the historical contingencies that lie beyond that. This, I think, is important in order to develop a critical thought and be able to formulate a personal interpretation of reality, to better filter information, to understand diversity in a different way, and to be more open to what is on the other side of the border. Thank you very much.
Okay, Anna, thank you. Thank you very much for this perceptive talk about borders and their functions. And I'm now looking at our audience, and there might be some questions. Just wave your hand and I'll be right with you. There is one over there.
Thank you. As a border researcher, what can you do to influence the public narrative and the public opinion, and how to make borders more inclusive?
Okay, I'll just repeat briefly. How can you, as a researcher, contribute to this border narrative with the general public in particular?
Well, this is an occasion, I think, and more of these occasions should be organized, I think, and we as researchers should find more ways to talk to the general public and also to appear in newspapers and share our knowledge and our critical understanding of borders in a different way in order to try and contrast somehow the mainstream narrative. At the same time, I think that research should try and be more local, involving more local stakeholders, more people working in associations, civil society person, etc., in order to increase the exchange. It's not, I'm not saying that this doesn't exist, it's something that we already do, but it should grow. And I think these two things, and especially finding a way somehow to translate our language that sometimes can be hard without losing its complexity. That this, I think, is the greater challenge that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here.
You talked about the fact that more control of the borders lead to more illegal crossing. And it just linked in my mind to prostitution, the fact that in some countries prostitution has been legalized so that the rights of prostitutes can be more protected. Do you think that if we lower the controls, it would mean that migrants could have a better protection?
Okay.
Good question. Actually, it's also a good connection, and I'll explain why. I don't think it's about lower control, it's about different policies and management of borders. Because as long as borders are just barriers, the only way to cross them is illegality. and this put migrants at risk. Whereas most serious and encompassing politics related to migration, related to the refugee crisis, which is a reality and it's not going to end, as I said, would allow for a better management of this without migrants have to rely on illegal crossing. And I said it was a good connection, the one with prostitution, because for me, I got to better understand this relation between border control and illegality, thinking about smuggling, especially related to women smuggling as prostitutes, and the fact that a lot of research, especially intersectional feminist studies, have highlighted how the control of borders actually put people in a situation to become subject to slavery, to become more vulnerable in a way, because they have to rely on smugglers, on illegal ways to cross.
Thank you. More? Have we got more questions? We don't seem to have more questions, but I'm just reminding our streaming audience that this is UEF Café Smart, which is one of the science cafes organized by the University of Eastern Finland to celebrate Finland 100. You can see we have blue and white pins like this, tiny, but we know blue and white anyway. Thank you, and thank you, Anna. And this might be the time for those members of the audience who haven't yet got their free cup of coffee to go over there and get some coffee, or even more coffee in some cases. So we need 30 seconds or something like that to get the second speaker on stage. And I'll have a sip of coffee at this point. Okay, I think it's time to start our second talk, and the second speaker, the microphone works, I hope, is Dr. Esa Penttilä, who's a senior lecturer in English at the School of Humanities at the University of Eastern Finland. He teaches especially English language and translation, and he's worked a lot on English idioms. And his talk today is English Influence on Finnish in Social Media. Welcome.
Thank you, Jopi. I will. My perspective is on particular part of language that can be seen in media and the influence of globalisation that can be seen in Finnish in the media. So first a few words about the present situation, which of course that Finnish is a fairly small language, although in terms of language size it's actually a fairly good-sized language with no fear of dying soon. But in any case, yeah, so in the present globalized world, in Finland, of course, we have Finnish and Swedish, but I'm only talking about the Finnish-speaking Finnish language at the moment. So in Finland, in the present globalized, multilingual, multicultural world, we actually have a very strong English influence. And you could actually think of the environment as bilingual, with Finnish and English, not as equal, but as both very strong languages there. For example, almost everyone at school in Finland studies English as their A language. In other words, has several courses in English. Almost half of the TV programs are produced in North America, about 15% in Europe, many of which in English-speaking countries. So part of that, or more than half of our TV programs in general are in English. And of course we can hear the English there, because in Finland we use subtitles. So we read the text in Finnish, but we can hear the English there. And of course we have a lot of international context, especially in the younger generation. And that's internet's one factor that has helped that a lot. And of course we have situations like this where we have speakers from various backgrounds, and English is the language that we share, and that's why we speak English. But even sometimes in cases where everyone would be able to speak Finnish, they still use English among each other. So English definitely has an influence on Finnish. And it can be seen, for example, at vocabulary level in our words. We may use just simple English words like facepalm, or then words that are English derived but have been inflected in Finnish according to the Finnish principles of morphology, like rakettaa, which comes from rage, or ropettaa, which comes from role play. It's used as a verb in English. I just heard yesterday, learned this. Then we have words like level, which is an English word, but at the same time we have also an alternative like leveli or levu, which are Finnish forms of the same English word. Then in writing, the English influence can be seen in more and more Finns start to write compounds as two separate words, just as they do in English, and which is not according to the principles of Finnish, like yhdyssana, compound noun, which in Finnish should be written together. Or at the beginning of a sentence, where in English you separate an adverbial with a comma. That's not done in Finnish, but because people are influenced by English, they also start to use that type of comma in Finnish. Okay, but I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to talk more about the figurative idioms like pala kakkua, piece of cake, which of course means something is an easy task, or sataa kissoja ja koiria, it's raining cats and dogs, which doesn't of course mean that there are cats and dogs falling from the sky, but that it's raining heavily. English idioms translated into Finnish. Just a few words about what an idiom is, of course, since that may be something that's worth pointing out. Well, idioms are these multi-word expressions like rain, cats and dogs, or well, in the case of, we have the meaning to die. In English we have the idiom kick the bucket. Two words which have a meaning that you can't actually know on the basis of the individual words in that expression. Similarly, in a corresponding Finnish expression would be, for example, heittää veivinsä, to throw one's crank, which means to die, but you don't know it on the basis of the word meanings. These are very essential to, well, basically every native language, so that well, there are these concepts of native-like selection or idiom principle, so that although in principle we could combine words, any words, and make grammatical sentences, but in real life we don't. There are certain structures that are used more often and more frequently, and when someone uses different structures, although they are grammatically correct, you immediately think that, okay, they are not native speakers of this language. Okay, that's idiom principle and native selection. So we have these idioms, many multi-word combinations that we use a lot, and they are at the heart of our native language. Now, well, the phenomenon that I'm now talking about is this word-for-word translation of English idioms into Finnish, which takes place in various areas, and which you can see also in social media especially, but also in public media. And that's a case of, you could call it a concealed code switching, which also makes it difficult maybe to notice that it's going on there. Because you use Finnish words, but the idiom structure and the meaning comes from English. So you don't immediately notice that, okay, this is actually not a Finnish expression, except that if you don't know the meaning of the English expression, you don't understand the meaning of the Finnish version of it. Basically they are, or usually they are consciously produced, so the speakers who use them, they use them for purpose, and it's required that you know English in order to produce them and in order to understand them when someone uses them. They are especially common in youth language, but not only there. So I've got, well, and they are different from expressions which are, let's say, slogans from popular movies that we use, like we say, "I'll be back." That's used in English, basically. That's from Terminator movies, or "Make My Day," which is from Dirty Harry movies. Maybe your generation don't know about these movies, but they used to be these movies. Okay, in any case, those slogans are usually used in English, also in Finnish context, but these expressions are translated from English into Finnish. And you see lots of examples of these in the social media. For example, there's just one example from some discussion forum, so that someone is referring to someone like "potkaisee sankoa," in other words, kick the bucket. The expression that I mentioned already earlier, meaning to die. One of us is going to die. Here, there is actually, because in some cases, those who use these expressions realize that maybe not everyone understands this expression if they don't know the Finnish corresponding expression. So they may add, for example, like here, heittää lusikkansa nurkkaan, to throw the spoon into the corner, which is a Finnish idiom meaning to die. So they sort of give an extra explanation explaining the meaning of the translated English idiom. And you can actually Google almost any English expression or idiom when you just translate it word for word into Finnish, and Google that, and you can find examples of it. So there are lots of those in social media. And it's typical, of course, for youth language, so you can see it in different discussion forums and things like, or areas like those, or contexts like those. But then there are also areas of public media, especially certain genres, where this is becoming more and more popular. There's, for example, an example about Prime Minister Jyrki Katainen, or present ex-Prime Minister Jyrki Katainen, who was described as rampa-ankka, a lame duck, which is an expression that is actually you come across fairly often in political texts in Finnish newspapers, although having done a questionnaire research about how many people understand what it means, it's a very small percentage, or was a few years ago. I don't know, maybe it has increased. It is a fact that often there is also an explanation following this expression, lame duck, but it clearly comes from the American context, where lame duck refers to a politician whose term is about to end, and therefore he or she has no real authority and can't make any decisions any longer. And all our prime ministers, at least since Matti Vanhanen, have been described as rampa-ankka at some point. So Matti Vanhanen, Mari Kiviniemi, Jyrki Katainen, Alexander Stubb, probably Juha Sipilä in the future as well. Okay, so politics is one area where you meet these expressions. Another is popular media, for example, film reviews, TV shows. I just, recently heard about or read about in Karelian, the local newspaper, someone describing Bob Dylan's life work as tuotantovartalo, which is body of work, which is clearly a translated expression from English. And if a Finn comes across with that, there was an explanation after that. If a Finn comes across that without no knowledge of what the body of work means in English, probably wouldn't understand what this means. Similarly, a fairly common idiom like it's not ei ole meidän kuppi teetä, this is not our cup of tea, which I've come across recently in a few contexts in the discussion, in TV discussions and radio shows. Most recently, 2 months ago, in the public, or Yleisradio, the Finnish public broadcasting company show, one of those. And it's also an expression which, we may learn already at school, and therefore there are quite a few Finns who might understand what the meaning is. But if you don't know the expression in English, it's not my cup of tea, then you just wouldn't be able to understand the Finnish translation. A third area where this is also very heavily influenced, the English influence can be seen, is sports in public media. Of course, sports is an international context where you compete with other people from various other nations, and of course at present the teams have players from various countries, and English is used a lot, and also in media context where you discuss sports, then you read about, you hear about things in English, and then it affects the way you write about and speak about it in Finnish. One example is this expression, monkey on my back, which is an English idiom meaning that you have some sort of mental difficulty. Typically, when a player or or a team has difficulties in scoring a goal, then it's described as having a monkey on their back, apina harteilla, which is very typical in sports context, but out of sports context you don't actually meet it often or come across it often in Finnish. But those people who are interested in sports would probably at the moment know what it means, especially since nowadays it actually seems to have become more and more productive, so that, well, you can change the words there, you can add adjectives there. You only have a small monkey on his neck, for example. That was in Iltalehti, or in about an ice hockey player who had difficulties of making a goal. He complained that, okay, I had a gorilla in my back. It was a talking gorilla. That's in Finnish, of course. Puhuva gorilla, and so on. And even, well, about a few months ago, I heard an expression on TV where someone scored in a football game, and the announcer said that, okay, ei ole eläintarhaa siellä harteilla. There is no zoo on his back. So something to do with animals, monkeys, but already creatively used. So now it seems that it's actually becoming part of the Finnish idiom repertoire. Okay, well, just this one point that nowadays, because of the internet and constant contacts, international contacts, these expressions also travel very fast from English into Finnish. There is this expression, because X or because something, which is started as an internet meme. It's not a thing that you wouldn't understand probably without knowing the original English expression, but it still has some additional meanings that you probably would make you say that it is an idiom still. But in any way, this was first met in English 2011, and it now has already become part and parcel of the Finnish repertoire. So you can hear this in Finnish, and it's normal Finnish, and everybody understands what it means. So an expression that wasn't there before, and wasn't there even in English before 6 years ago. So nowadays, of course, these travel fast. Okay, just to tie this to the theme, 100 years of Finland. Well, partly this resembles the situation that 100 years ago was slightly reversed. Then we had Finns who traveled or migrated to the United States. And they of course were in an environment where they spoke, in their close community they used Finnish quite a lot, but of course in a larger sense the community and the environment was English speaking, and that started to affect their language. And of course the language of Finnish immigrants in America uses these types of expressions. Well, that was 100 years ago. Now we don't have to move to the United States. This can take place in Finland, in the Finnish-speaking context. We have so many contacts with English-speaking world that we sort of, or especially some of us, become like virtual immigrants in our home country. And English actually becomes part of our identity to a large extent. So, just to conclude, this is one aspect of globalization at the local level. So, English influences Finnish. We use, well, sometimes English words, but sometimes Finnish words with English structures and meanings. And, well, that's actually part of natural language developments that has taken place throughout history. There are different languages that have been important at different times. Maybe Russian at some time, Swedish definitely in Finland at some time. Now it's English, and not just in Finland, but of course in various other parts as well. However, one thing that is different is, of course, that now it's almost everybody basically is involved. So maybe in earlier days it required that you belong to an elite which was bilingual or multilingual, but now basically everyone, at least in the younger generations, is bilingual. And just to conclude that, of course, it's not just English, there are also other languages which affect. A few years ago there was a PhD thesis defended at the University of Helsinki, where languages at the Helsinki area, or the Finnish at the Helsinki area, and other languages as well were studied. And there they noticed that there was this new expression, mä vannon, I swear, or mä lupaan, I promise, which is actually a translation from the Arabic, wallahi, I promise, I swear. And that's beginning to be used more and more, of course, especially in immigrant circles where the people come from immigrant backgrounds, but also with people who discuss with them. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this talk that took us to the everyday level of language and Finnish in relation to other world languages. Have we got some questions anywhere, or I hope that the zoo is not on your neck at this point. Okay, there is at least one.
Thank you. So you gave excellent examples of these word-for-word translations that we now see also in what we consider official media, like Helsingin Sanomat or Ilta-Sanomat. And to me, as a translator, it seems like that's just laziness, and there would be an actual Finnish equivalent available. But my question is that what will happen to these original Finnish ways of saying things when we no longer bother using them but opt for the English version instead, the word-for-word version?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, of course, which is something that we will see in the future. But definitely there is a possibility that, especially, well, some of them just die out simply and will be replaced by these English-derived expressions. And well, as a translator trainer, I share your feelings that this may be laziness. Well, not necessarily laziness, because these people are not translators usually, and maybe it just they read these things about these things in English, so it somehow subconsciously or automatically comes to them, and they don't even realize that they are using these English translations. And of course, some of them are just coincidental and they won't be used any longer. But some of these most likely will continue to be used, and other people will start using them, and well, then they will become part of Finnish idiom repertoire, actually.
Okay, have you got other questions? Yes.
Well, first I have a comment to the last one. I've lived abroad for several years and I haven't written in my native language for many years by now, besides maybe short text messages. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I read something and then I tell it on. At some point I had to report back to the Danish ministry in Danish, and many words I used were the English words because I simply just forgot that there were Danish equivalents of these words. But I have a question also that I don't know if it still exists, but earlier there was this, you made words in Finland, words for Walkman and words for computer, you made Finnish words for these. And I wonder if, I don't know if it still goes on, but would it even make sense today, where you have so much and so fast impressions from outside?
So the question was, do we still try to make our own words for concepts and maybe things that come from, which are known in English to us?
Yeah, I haven't really studied that in any deeper sense, but I have the impression that that's actually decreasing, so that we actually start using the Finnish, the English words more and more. However, of course, in Finnish there is this difference that the Finnish language belongs to a different language family, and we have these inflections and we inflect the words. So they are, although you can see the English root there, then they are sort of modified into a Finnish way of that word. But definitely, well, these new things come into our society so fast that, and people start talking about them, that there is no way to, no time to develop new terms. There are, of course, these sometimes attempts to give new expressions or try to use them, but people just don't use them sometimes. They just use these English words. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes? Good.
Hi, as a foreigner here, I'm just very curious about why, what makes Finnish people, your English so great? Is it because of a history or culture, or I don't know?
So, what makes Finnish people learn and speak such good English? Have you got an answer to this?
Well, we start early. That's of course one thing, and well, according to studies, the Finnish attitude towards foreign languages in general, but especially towards English, is very positive. And of course, one factor definitely is that we have subtitled films and TV programs, so that we constantly hear English, and we have more contact with English than, for example, countries where there are dubbed films and TV programs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, then I think it's time to come to the end of our UEF Smart Café, which was part of Finland 100. I would once again like to thank our speakers and the audience as well for the smart questions we had. And before you go, I would like to remind you that we have some UEF bulletins available here in English, which you can take a copy of when you leave after your cup of coffee. And we also have some information about the UEF alumni network, the UEF Friends Network, which you can join if you, for instance, have studied with us. So once again, thank you very much, and thank you, and see you again at some other UEF event. Thank you.